In this video, I'm going to review the Spider Farmer SE3000 LED grow light. This light is a game changer. Ever since LED lights came on the market, I've been looking for a light with this kind of design, and it's finally here. Let me show it to you. That might look like a weird design, but there are a lot of good reasons why the light should all be designed this way. I'm going to break this video into two parts. In the first part, I'll describe the light and some of its special features, and we'll go over some of the specs. In the second part, I'll review the light using my 10-point buyer's guide and see how this light stacks up to that wish list. When LED lights first came on the market, I found a DIY project of someone who built a much better design than anything on the market. Now, at the time, it was a lot of work, and I really wasn't interested in building my own light. But the design was great. Spider Farmer has finally come out with that design. And I think this just makes so much sense. You might be familiar with the latest LED lights, and they generally come on an aluminum plate that's about 1 foot square. That's quite small. When you take that LED light and hang it over your plants, it doesn't cover a very large area. I mean, maybe 2 by 2 feet, and even that's a stretch. There's not much light on the edges. For most home growers, we want to cover a larger area. I mean, we have lots of plants. The way this light is designed is that it has strips of LED chips, and between them spaces. So this light comes with 4 strips. The overall size is about 2 feet by 2 feet. And that will easily illuminate an area that's 3 feet by 3 feet. That's a pretty good sized area. In addition to covering a larger area, this design has some other nice features. The longevity of LED lights depends very much on how hot you run them. Some of the first grow lights that came out had fans in them. And the reason for those fans is that they were trying to dissipate the heat away from the LED chips to get longer life out of them. Now, in the last couple years, people have changed that design to something that's simpler. They use an aluminum plate. The LED chips are attached to that plate, and the aluminum is used as a heat sink to draw heat away from the chips. Now, that design still has a problem, because the power supply is attached to that aluminum plate. And I have one of those running, and it's a very low power system, and it still gets very hot. And we don't yet know how long the LED chips will last in those kind of lights. Now, if we have a look at this design, you'll notice that the power supply is in the center here. It's not near the LED lights. So the heat generated by the power supply will simply raise up away from the light. The lights themselves have aluminum backing, and that will act like a heat sink and draw heat away. But you'll notice the spaces between these bars. That will allow lots of air circulation. And this light should run a lot cooler than those other designs that use one solid plate for all the light chips. This design makes so much sense. The other thing you can do with this is adjust things. I can take this power supply and mount it somewhere else so that it's not even near the light. It has a very long cable to make that easy. The other change I could make is to adjust the size of this light. Now, this distance is fixed, but I can move these in. All I have to do is loosen these 2 knobs here, and this light will slide closer to the center. And in fact, I can move these center ones just as easily. So you can adjust the light to fit the grow bench that you have. There's one other feature I'd like to discuss. If you have a look at most LED grow lights, they've taken the LED chips and they've distributed it over the surface of the light. What that does is it gives you really high intensity in the center of the light, but much less around the edges. And if you look at the light distribution diagrams, you see that right away. High numbers in the middle, very low numbers here, even lower numbers in the corner. Now, Spider Farmer has done something unique here. They've changed the distribution of the light chips. There are fewer light chips in the middle and more along the edge. And that makes a lot of sense because the middle gets light from both these and the ones in the center. But out here near the edge of the light, particularly past the light, you only get light from these chips. So they've concentrated the light chips along the edge. What that means is that you get a much more even distribution of light over the whole surface area. And for most of us growers, that makes a lot more sense. I mean, if you're growing pot plants and you got a really big one in the middle, you want all that light in the middle. But if we're growing 20 small tomato seedlings spaced out, we want them all to get the same amount of light. And this design helps that problem. Now, one of the things that is different about this light than the other lights I reviewed is that this one comes in parts. You get this box of pieces and you do have to assemble it yourself. Now, that's pretty easy to do. It requires no tools, but there are a lot of moving parts. So what I've done is I've made a separate video to show you how to put this light together. And I'll put a link to that at the end of this video. I'll also put a link to my other LED videos. Now let me go over the specs of this light. It is a bit on the heavy side. It weighs about 15 pounds and it's about 2 by 2 feet in size. Now it's also available as the SE3000 light. That has 6 bars of LED lights and is about 10 inches bigger in each direction. There's also an SE3000 which also has 6 bars but is even bigger. The price of the SE3000 is $370 US. It's a 300 watt light and it has 896 LED chips on it. That's a lot of chips compared to smaller lights. The light comes with a 5-year warranty, and Spider Farmer has been pretty good about repairing and replacing any defective parts on its lights. They have a very good reputation online now. The light comes fully equipped with hanging wires, and they use the pulley system, so they're very easy to raise and lower. And the power cord is nice and long, which I really appreciate because my power bars are away from my lights. Now I'd like to go through my 10-point buyer's guide to see how this light stacks up. One of the first things I always look for is the spectra. I want to see a good peak in the blue and red regions, and I want to see some green light. Believe it or not, green light is important for plant growth. The next thing I want to see is a peak in the area of 730 nanometers. This is the infrared range and is important for flowering plants. The SE3000 has a good spectra and it has special chips to add the infrared light, so it gets a check mark for that point. The next thing I like to look at is the value of the ppfd. This is the amount of light that plants can actually use. Now for low light plants, we want something in the area of 100 to 300. Medium plants will be 200 and 600. And if you want to flower things, you want values over 600, approaching 1000. The ppfd values for this light are between 600 and 1000. So that means this light can be used to grow just about any of your green plants, and it will be able to flower any of them. So this is a good high intensity light. I'll give it a check mark for ppfd. Purple light versus white light. Some of the early LED lights had blue and red light, and the reason for doing that is that they gave the highest intensity light, and those are the colors that plants need most. Most of the newer lights use white light chips. Now the efficiency for the plant is not quite so good with those chips, but the light is much more pleasing to the eye. And after all, it is us looking at these plants under lights. And so most growers actually prefer the white light. So I'll also give it a check mark for this. I always want to see the ppfd map. This shows you how much light intensity you have at different heights and at different locations underneath the light. Remember that the intensity right in the center is always high, but drops off as you go towards the outer edges of the light. And what we really want is a light that's very even in distribution. There's not a lot of value in having huge amount of light in the center and nothing on the edges, unless you're growing one large plant. These measurements are taken inside grow tents, and for a grow tent that's 3 feet by 3 feet at 12 inches high, we're getting values in the center of 1200. Around the edges, it's around 670, and at the corners, which is the lowest light, it's 440. That's a pretty good amount of light. So at 12 inches, you can pretty much grow anything you want under here and flower most houseplants. And remember that you're getting that intensity over a 3 by 3 foot area. To get those values, you have to have reflective surfaces around the outside. Remember, these grow tents are designed to reflect all of the light back towards the center. So your light stand will work better and have more light if you surround it with reflective material to drive that light back into the center where the plants are. The PPFD map is included with the information, so that gets it a check mark. The next thing I look at is the wattage. This is a 300 watt light, so it's going to cost you the equivalent of 3 of the old 100 watt incandescent lights. That's not very much for covering a large surface area like this. That's good value for money, and I'll give it a check mark for wattage. Veg versus bloom. Some of the high-end lights allow you to switch between veg and bloom, and that changes the ratio of blue and red light. This feature is only found on high-end lights, and to be honest with you, I wouldn't use a feature like that anyways. I typically turn these lights on and just leave them. And if I want plants to bloom, I might just increase the intensity, but I don't play around with veg and bloom. But I can't give it a check mark because that's not something you can control on this light. Point number 7. What is the efficiency of the light? Efficiency tells you how much light you get for every watt that's applied to the light. Or if we state that a different way, it's how much light do I get for my dollar? This light has a rating of 2.75. Now that's a pretty good value, but the newest lights on the market have values that are closer to 2.9. So a 2.75 light is not the most efficient one you can buy, but you also have to balance that with the price of the light. And I think you'd be hard pressed finding another light in this price range that has a better efficiency. So I'll give it a check mark for efficiency as well. Number 8 is a dimmer switch. Now this can be handy if you're growing different kinds of plants at different times of the year. So for instance, if you start off with seedlings in the spring, you might want to turn down that light. But as the seedlings get larger, you can increase the light so that they grow a little faster. If you want to flower something, you can increase the light again. So a dimmer switch is a nice thing to have, and this is equipped with a dimmer switch. Daisy chaining lights together is a great feature. That way you can use one set of controls and turn on all your lights at the same time. Now this light does use daisy chaining for the dimmer switch, but doesn't use it for the power switch. So if I had 3 lights, I can use one knob and dim them all at the same time, but each light needs to be plugged in individually. So that means you need to run some kind of power bar to collect all these wires. So I can only give it half a check mark for daisy chaining. The last item on my list there is a fan, and this is not equipped with a fan, but to be quite honest with you, I think the design is such that you really don't need a fan. Fans were important in the old days when the lights were less efficient, they created more heat, and all those LED chips were crammed together in a small space. With this new design, the LED chips are spaced out, there's lots of air around them, and the power supply is separate from the LED chips. So a fan really isn't necessary. But it doesn't have it, so it doesn't get a check mark. There you have my checklist for the Spider Farmer SE3000. Almost every item is checked off, and this light meets most of the requirements I have. And in fact, it meets all of the important ones. The other thing that's important to understand is that the design of this light is much superior over many of the other lights. This rack system that separates the lights and spreads them out over a larger area is a really good design. The spaces in between here are going to mean that these LEDs run cooler, and that means they're going to last me a long time. And the price of this light at $370 US is a pretty good buy. When you combine the price, the features, and the quality of Spider Farmer LED lights, you've got yourself a really good light here. And I'll bet I'll be able to run this light for many years to come. Now, if you want to know how to assemble this light, I'll put a link in the top right-hand corner. If you're interested in buying this light, I'll put some links to both Amazon and directly to Spider Farmer down below. Those are good places to go shopping. And if you're interested in more of my LED videos, I do discuss a number of different myths about LEDs, and I review other LED lights. Have a look at my videos, and I'll put a link in the bottom right corner. Get ready for growing seedlings. Almost time to get them started.